In a corporate server room, a 20-year IT veteran was about to discover that institutional knowledge has a price. What started as another Friday morning system update took a shocking turn when they came face-to-face with complete infrastructure, collapse, and a panicked phone call from the son who replaced them. Marcus Thompson wasn't your typical expendable employee. For 2 decades, he had spent his life building DataFlow Solutions' digital backbone from scratch, known for his encyclopedic understanding of every custom integration and legacy system that kept billions in transactions flowing. When he encountered Tyler Pemberton's desperate plea for help after catastrophic system failure, he had no idea he was walking into the ultimate validation of irreplaceable expertise. Marcus's response would lead to a complete shift in how corporations value institutional knowledge over nepotism. What began as a bitter termination would become the most expensive lesson in business history. DataFlow Solutions would never be the same after learning that some employees aren't just workers. They're the irreplaceable foundation upon which entire companies stand or fall. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Thompson had arrived at DataFlow Solutions at 6:47 a.m., same as he had every Tuesday for the past 20 years. The parking lot held only a handful of cars, the security guard's aging Honda, Rick Pemberton's silver BMW, and the cleaning crew's van. Marcus preferred these quiet morning hours, when the building hummed with nothing but servers and possibility. He badged into the building with the practiced motion of someone whose muscle memory had long ago mapped every routine. The lobby's marble floors reflected the early light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting familiar shadows across the DataFlow logo etched into the reception desk. 20 years of mornings, 20 years of being the first to check the overnight system logs, 20 years of ensuring everything ran smoothly before the rest of the world woke up. His workstation on the 3rd floor sat exactly as he'd left it, dual. Monitors displaying the green text of system status updates, coffee mug positioned precisely 3 inches from his keyboard, a small framed photo of his ex-wife from better times tucked discreetly behind his desk lamp. The divorce had been finalized 2 years ago, but Marcus hadn't found the heart to remove the picture. Some habits died harder than others. The overnight logs showed normal activity. Database backups had completed successfully. Network traffic remained within expected parameters. The legacy system that Marcus had built from scratch, a complex web of custom code, patches, and workarounds that only he fully understood, had run without incident. Another successful night in 20 years of successful nights. At 8:15 a.m., his desk phone rang. "Marcus, could you step into conference room B for a moment?" Rick Pemberton's voice carried an unusual formality that made Marcus pause mid-sip of his coffee. "Sure. Everything okay with the systems? Just come down when you can." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at the receiver. In 20 years, Rick had never summoned him to a conference room. Issues were discussed at workstations, solutions hammered out in real time, problems solved with the urgency that kept DataFlow's clients happy and their data secure. Conference. Room B sat on the 2nd floor, its glass walls offering a view of the main work area where early arrivals were settling into their routines. Marcus could see Sarah Martinez at her desk, already deep in code review, her dark hair pulled back in the practical ponytail she favored during intense work sessions. David Kim hunched over his monitor nearby, the young systems administrator. Marcus had been mentoring, still learning the intricate dance of keeping their infrastructure running. Marcus knocked once and entered. Rick Pemberton sat at the head of the polished conference table, his usual confident smile replaced by something that might have been discomfort. Across from him, Jennifer Walsh from Human Resources had spread, paperwork across the table like a dealer preparing for a high-stakes game. Her normally warm demeanor seemed strained, her eyes focused on the documents rather than meeting Marcus's gaze. "Have a seat, Marcus." Rick gestured to the chair directly across from Jennifer. The formality sent a chill through Marcus's chest. In 20 years, he'd sat in this conference room perhaps a dozen times, quarterly reviews, budget meetings, the occasional discussion about expanding the IT infrastructure. Never had it felt like this. Jennifer cleared her throat, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone delivering unwelcome news. Marcus, we need to discuss some organizational changes that will affect your position. The words hit him like a system failure alert, sudden, jarring, demanding immediate attention. Organizational changes? Rick leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. DataFlow is entering a new phase of growth. We need fresh perspectives, new approaches to how we handle our technical infrastructure. Fresh perspectives. Marcus repeated the words slowly, processing their implications like debugging faulty code. We're restructuring the systems administration department, Jennifer continued, sliding a document across the table. Your position is being eliminated as part of this reorganization. Marcus stared at the termination paperwork, the legal language, blurring as his mind struggled to process what he was hearing. 20 years of 16-hour days during system migrations, 20 years of Christmas mornings interrupted by server failures, 20 years of building something from nothing, of creating the digital backbone that had allowed DataFlow to grow from a 20-person startup to a company serving Fortune 500 clients. I don't understand. His voice sounded distant, unfamiliar. My performance reviews have always been exemplary. The systems run at 99.7% uptime. We haven't had a major incident in 3 years. Rick's expression shifted, revealing something Marcus had never seen before, a calculated coldness that suggested this conversation had been rehearsed. This isn't about performance, Marcus. It's about positioning the company for future growth. We need leadership that can think beyond maintaining legacy systems. Legacy systems? The phrase stung like a personal insult. Those legacy systems process $2 billion in client transactions every quarter, which is exactly why we need fresh thinking about how to modernize our approach. Rick's voice carried the smooth confidence of someone who'd found his talking points. We're bringing in new talent to spearhead that effort. The pieces fell into place with the horrible clarity of a cascading system failure. New talent. Who? Jennifer shifted uncomfortably, her pen clicking nervously against the table. Rick's smile returned, but it never reached his eyes. My son Tyler will be taking over your responsibilities. He's got a fresh computer science degree, new ideas about cloud architecture and modern development practices. The conference room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of keyboards from the work floor. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him, like a critical component failing under stress. Tyler. He spoke the name carefully, testing its weight. Your 22-year-old son with no professional experience is taking over systems that run a $200 million company. He's extremely capable. Rick's voice carried a defensive edge. Top of his class at Stanford, internships at Google and Microsoft. Internships. Marcus let the word hang in the air. Rick, do you understand what I do here? What these systems actually are? I understand that we need evolution, not just maintenance. Marcus looked at Jennifer, seeking some sign of sanity in the surreal conversation. Her discomfort was palpable, her usual professional composure cracking under the weight of what she was being asked to facilitate. How long do I have? Marcus asked. We need you to transition your responsibilities tomorrow, Jennifer replied quietly. Tyler starts Thursday. 1 day. Marcus stood slowly, his legs feeling unsteady. You want me to transfer 20 years of institutional knowledge in 1 day? You'll have time to document the critical processes, Rick said. Tyler's a quick learner. Marcus picked up the termination paperwork, scanning the details with the methodical attention he brought to system logs, severance package, benefits continuation, non-disclosure agreements, legal language designed to sanitize the human cost of corporate maneuvering. Through the conference room's glass walls, he could see Sarah looking up from her workstation, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she registered the scene playing out before her. 20 years of mentoring, of building a team that functioned like a well-tuned system, reduced to a PowerPoint slide about organizational restructuring. "I'll need access to my workstation to document the critical procedures," Marcus said finally. "Of course," Jennifer replied, relief evident in her voice. "And Marcus, I want you to know that this decision came from executive management. HR simply processes these decisions." Her attempt at distancing herself from the betrayal felt hollow, but Marcus recognized the position she was in. Jennifer Walsh had spent 15 years building HR processes based on merit and fairness. Today, she was being asked to formalize nepotism with legal paperwork. "I understand," Marcus replied. "You're just following orders." He signed the termination documents with the same careful precision he brought to system configurations, his signature marking the end of 2 decades of service. As he set down the pen, he caught sight of Sarah through the glass wall, her face now etched with unmistakable alarm. Rick stood, extending his hand. "Marcus, I want you to know this isn't personal. You've been a valuable contributor to DataFlow's success." Marcus looked at the offered hand but made no move to take it. 20 years, Rick. I built those systems from the ground up. I know every line of code, every integration point, every potential failure mode. Your son doesn't. He'll learn. Some things can't be learned quickly enough. Marcus turned toward the door, then paused. "When is the next scheduled system update?" "Friday morning," Rick replied. "Why?" "Just curious about timing." Marcus left the conference room without another word, the termination paperwork clutched in his hand like evidence of a crime. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt interminable, each floor counting down like a countdown timer on a system, about to fail. Sarah was waiting by his workstation when the elevator doors opened. "Marcus, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." He handed her the termination letter without speaking, watching her face transform as she read the corporate language that had just destroyed his career. "This is insane," she whispered. "They can't just— Tyler Pemberton? Rick's kid?" "Marcus, he doesn't know anything about our systems." "No," Marcus replied quietly. "He doesn't." The implications hung between them like a system warning that everyone was choosing to ignore. Marcus sat at his workstation one last time, his fingers hovering over the keyboard that had been his primary tool for 2 decades. 20 years of knowledge, of understanding, of expertise that couldn't be documented in a single day or learned by someone whose greatest technical achievement was a summer internship. As he began typing his transition notes, Marcus wondered if Rick Pemberton understood what he'd just set in motion. The systems that kept DataFlow running weren't just code and servers. They were living things that required understanding, intuition, and 20 years of experience to nurture properly. Tyler Pemberton was about to inherit something he couldn't possibly comprehend, just days before a critical system update that Marcus had been preparing for weeks. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to modernize DataFlow's technical leadership, Rick had just created the conditions for a catastrophic failure. But that was no longer Marcus's problem. At least, that's what he told himself as he began documenting 20 years of expertise in the space of a single afternoon. Marcus arrived at 6:30 a.m. Wednesday morning, 30 minutes earlier than usual. His badge still worked, for now. The building felt different already, like a place he was visiting rather than inhabiting. He'd spent most of the previous evening creating transition documents, knowing full well that no amount of documentation could capture 2 decades of institutional knowledge. Tyler Pemberton was already waiting in the lobby, dressed in an expensive suit that screamed recent graduate trying to look important. At 22, he possessed the confident swagger of someone who'd never failed at anything that mattered. His handshake was firm, practiced, the grip of someone who'd been taught that confidence could substitute for competence. "Marcus, Great to finally meet you properly. Tyler's smile was warm, genuine even. Dad's told me so much about the amazing systems you've built here. I'm really excited to take things to the next level. The casual dismissal of 20 years of work as merely a starting point would have been infuriating if it weren't so perfectly predictable. Marcus had seen this before. New graduates convinced that innovation meant discarding everything that came before. Let's head upstairs, Marcus replied evenly. We have a lot to cover. The elevator ride was filled with Tyler's chatter about cloud architecture and microservices, buzzwords strung together with the enthusiasm of someone who'd memorized conference presentations without understanding underlying principles. Marcus listened with growing unease, recognizing the dangerous combination of theoretical knowledge and practical inexperience. At Marcus's workstation, Tyler's workstation now, the handover began with a tour of the system architecture. Marcus pulled up the network diagram, a complex web of interconnected components that had evolved organically over 2 decades. This is the core infrastructure, Marcus began, pointing to various elements on the screen. The database cluster handles all client transactions, the application servers process requests, the legacy middleware layer. Legacy middleware? Tyler interrupted, leaning forward with obvious disdain. Why haven't we modernized this stack? This architecture looks like something from the early 2000s. Because it works, Marcus replied patiently. These systems process $2 billion in transactions quarterly without failure. Every component has been tested under real-world conditions. But surely we can containerize this, move it to the cloud, implement proper DevOps practices. Tyler's fingers drummed against the desk with nervous energy. I mean, this monolithic approach is exactly what's holding companies back from true scalability. Sarah Martinez appeared at Marcus's shoulder, having overheard the conversation. Her expression carried barely concealed alarm. Tyler, these systems have dependencies that aren't immediately obvious. The middleware layer handles transaction rollbacks in ways that... I appreciate the concern, Sarah, but I've worked with similar architectures at Google, Tyler interrupted, his tone carrying the polite condescension of someone humoring a less informed colleague. Modern container orchestration can handle these use cases much more efficiently. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Tyler, have you reviewed the documentation I sent last night? I skimmed it. Honestly, most of that legacy documentation becomes irrelevant once you understand the underlying business logic. Tyler pulled out his laptop, a pristine MacBook that clearly hadn't seen serious development work. I've been thinking we should start by migrating the database to a cloud-native solution. The database migration is scheduled for next month, Marcus said carefully. After the Friday system update, there are specific dependencies. Right, about that. Tyler's confident smile faltered slightly. Dad mentioned some routine maintenance thing on Friday. I assume it's just applying patches? Marcus stared at the young man who would be responsible for DataFlow's most critical systems in less than 24 hours. Tyler, the Friday update isn't routine maintenance. It's a major version upgrade of the core transaction processing engine. I've been preparing for it for 6 weeks. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Sarah shifted beside them, her concern now obvious to anyone paying attention. David Kim looked up from his workstation nearby, his expression troubled. Okay, so, major version upgrade. Tyler's voice carried forced confidence. How complicated could it be? Most of these enterprise systems have automated upgrade processes. Now. Marcus opened his preparation folder, revealing dozens of scripts, rollback procedures, and dependency matrices. The upgrade affects 17 different subsystems. Each one has to be updated in a specific sequence to maintain data integrity. If you execute the steps out of order... Marcus, I appreciate your thoroughness, but I think you might be overcomplicating things. Tyler's interruption carried an edge of impatience. Modern systems engineering emphasizes automation and standardization. All this manual intervention just introduces human error. Sarah stepped closer, her voice tight with concern. Tyler, Marcus isn't overcomplicating anything. These systems have custom integrations that don't follow standard patterns. If you don't understand the dependencies… Sarah, I understand. You're concerned about change, but this is exactly the kind of thinking that keeps companies stuck in the past. Tyler's response revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what he was inheriting. Trust me, I've handled complex system migrations before. Where? Marcus asked quietly. Well, during my internship at Microsoft, I worked on… Internships aren't the same as production responsibility, David Kim interjected from his workstation, his usual deference replaced by obvious worry. Marcus, maybe we should postpone the Friday update until Tyler has more time to… The update can't be postponed, Marcus replied. We're already 3 weeks past the vendor's security deadline. If we delay further, we'll be out of compliance with our security certifications. Rick Pemberton chose that moment to arrive, his presence filling the space with executive authority. How's the transition going, gentlemen? Tyler straightened, his confidence returning in his father's presence. Great, Dad. Marcus was just walking me through some routine maintenance procedures. Nothing I can't handle. Rick's smile was triumphant, the expression of someone whose judgment was being validated. Excellent. Marcus, I appreciate your thoroughness, but I'm sure Tyler can take it from here. No need to overwhelm him with every detail on his first day. Marcus looked between father and son, recognizing the futility of the moment. 2 decades of experience was being dismissed as unnecessary complexity, his warnings interpreted as resistance to change rather than genuine concern for system stability. There are critical procedures, Marcus began, which Tyler will master quickly, Rick interrupted. He's got excellent instincts for this kind of work, sometimes fresh, eyes see solutions that experience might overlook. The dismissal was complete. Marcus gathered his documentation, knowing it would likely be ignored, and began collecting his personal items. 20 years of accumulated knowledge walked out the door in a cardboard box, while Tyler Pemberton settled into the chair that controlled DataFlow's digital nervous system. As Marcus reached the elevator, he heard Tyler's voice drifting from the workstation. Sarah, can you show me how to access the admin panels? And let's schedule a meeting about modernizing these legacy workflows. The elevator doors closed on 20 years of institutional knowledge, leaving behind a young man who confused confidence with competence, and a system update that would test every assumption about the difference between the two. Marcus pressed the ground floor button and wondered how long it would take for Tyler's education to begin. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus sat in his car for a long moment, staring back at the building that had been his professional home for 2 decades. Through the third-floor windows, he could see figures moving around his former workstation, Tyler no doubt already planning the modernization that would, Marcus feared, lead to disaster. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. This is insane. Can you be reached if we need help? Marcus stared at the message for a long time before responding, I'll be around. But as he drove away from DataFlow Solutions for what might be the last time as an employee, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that around might not be nearly close enough. Marcus woke up Thursday morning without an alarm for the first time in 20 years. The silence felt wrong, like a system running too quietly, often the first sign that something critical had failed. He'd spent Wednesday evening organizing his home office, a ritual that felt more like preparing for a funeral than unemployment. His coffee tasted different without the urgency of overnight system logs waiting for review. The morning news droned in the background, but Marcus found himself checking his phone every few minutes, waiting for the call that would inevitably come. Old habits died hard, and 20 years of being DataFlow's go-to crisis manager had left him perpetually on standby. The call came at 9:47 a.m. Marcus, it's Sarah. Her voice carried the strained quality of someone trying to appear calm while fighting panic. Do you have a few minutes? What's wrong? Probably nothing. I hope it's nothing. But Tyler missed the morning backup verification, and when I mentioned it, he said automated systems don't need manual verification. Marcus closed, his eyes already seeing the cascade of problems that single oversight could trigger. Which backups? Transaction logs and client data. The automated system shows green, but you always said, that automated systems lie when they're failing gracefully. Marcus finished her sentence, the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders despite no longer being responsible. Sarah, you need to manually verify those backups immediately. I tried, but Tyler said I was micromanaging. He's changed system access protocols. I can't get to the backup verification tools without his approval. The implications hit Marcus like a cascade failure alert. In one day, Tyler had managed to eliminate the redundant safety checks that had prevented disasters for 2 decades. The system was running blind, and no one with authority seemed to understand the danger. What about David? Can he access the verification tools? Tyler restructured the access controls. He said too many people having administrative access creates security vulnerabilities. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Marcus, he doesn't understand what these systems actually do. He sees oversight as inefficiency. Marcus found himself pacing his living room, muscle memory activating crisis management protocols he no longer had authority to execute. Sarah, listen carefully. You need to document everything, every change Tyler makes, every system anomaly, every deviation from established procedures. If this goes sideways— When this goes sideways, Sarah corrected grimly. The second call came 2 hours later. David Kim's voice cracked with the stress of someone drowning in responsibilities he wasn't prepared for. Marcus, I'm sorry to bother you, but Tyler asked me to implement some configuration changes, and I don't understand what they're supposed to accomplish. What kind of changes? He wants to modify the database connection pooling parameters. Something about optimizing resource allocation. But when I looked at the current settings, they seem fine. Actually, they seem specifically tuned for our transaction patterns. They were more than fine. Marcus had spent months optimizing those parameters after analyzing 2 years of transaction data. The current settings prevented the database lockups that had plagued DataFlow's early growth, a lesson learned through painful trial and error. David, don't make those changes. But Tyler says the current settings are inefficient. He showed me some documentation from Oracle about optimal connection pooling. Generic documentation doesn't account for our specific use patterns. Marcus kept his voice level, fighting the urge to drive back to DataFlow and fix things himself. Those settings prevent database contention during peak transaction periods. If you change them, Tyler says that's not how modern database architecture works. Marcus closed his eyes, recognizing the dangerous combination of theoretical knowledge and practical inexperience. Tyler was applying textbook solutions to custom problems, like using generic medication to treat a condition that required specialized care. The third call came just after lunch. This time it was Jennifer Walsh from HR, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone navigating corporate politics. Marcus, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to check how you're adjusting. To work to you with a transition. I'm fine, Jennifer. What's really going on? A pause. There have been some concerns raised about system performance today. Minor issues, but Helen Crawford has been asking questions about the timing of your departure. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction that he immediately suppressed. What kind of issues? Database. Response times are slower than usual. Some client applications are experiencing intermittent connectivity problems. Tyler assures everyone it's normal variation, but Sarah Martinez has been quite vocal about her concerns. Sarah understands. These systems better than anyone except you, Jennifer finished. Marcus, hypothetically speaking, if we needed to. Consult with you about technical issues. Would you be available? The question hung in the air like a system warning that everyone was choosing to ignore. Marcus understood the position Jennifer was in, caught between Rick Pemberton's authority and the growing evidence that his decision was creating problems. Jennifer, I'm not an employee anymore. Any consulting arrangement would need to go through proper channels. Of course. I'm just gathering information about potential options. After Jennifer hung up, Marcus sat in his quiet home office, staring at the phone. 3 calls in one day, each revealing another crack in the foundation Tyler was supposed to be maintaining. The system was showing stress fractures, but the person responsible for monitoring those fractures was too inexperienced to recognize the warnings. His laptop sat open to DataFlow's public status page, a dashboard that showed system availability to clients. Everything displayed green, normal operation across all services. But Marcus knew the difference between systems that were running well and systems that were running on borrowed time. The status page lied beautifully, showing only what automated monitoring could detect. It couldn't capture the subtle degradations that preceded major failures, the early warning signs that required human expertise to interpret. Tyler was flying blind in clear weather, unaware that storm clouds were gathering just beyond his visibility. Marcus closed the laptop and tried to focus on other things: job applications, household projects, anything that didn't involve DataFlow Solutions. But 20 years of responsibility couldn't be discarded like outdated hardware. Somewhere inside Silicon Valley, the systems he'd built from scratch were developing stress fractures, and the person responsible for maintaining them didn't possess the experience to recognize the danger. Tomorrow was Friday, the day of the critical system update that Tyler seemed to view as routine maintenance. Marcus had planned that update for 6 weeks, mapping dependencies and preparing rollback procedures for every possible failure scenario. Tyler had 1 day of experience with systems he'd dismissed as unnecessarily complex. As evening approached, Marcus found himself checking his phone obsessively, waiting for the call that would signal the beginning of the end. The system was failing slowly, gracefully, in ways that wouldn't trigger alarms until it was too late to prevent disaster. And somewhere in DataFlow's offices, Tyler Pemberton was probably congratulating himself on a successful second day, blissfully unaware that he was presiding over the early stages of a catastrophic system failure. Marcus poured himself a drink and settled in to wait. Experience had taught him that complex systems failed in predictable patterns, and Tyler was following that pattern with textbook precision. The only question was whether the failure would be contained or whether it would cascade into something that could destroy DataFlow entirely. The phone remained silent, but Marcus knew that silence was temporary. Tomorrow would bring the test that would reveal whether confidence could substitute for competence, and whether 20 years of institutional knowledge could be replaced by enthusiasm and good intentions. He suspected he already knew the answer. Thursday morning brought the kind of Silicon Valley fog that turned DataFlow's glass building into a hazy silhouette, as if the structure itself was losing definition. Inside, Tyler Pemberton arrived at 7:30 a.m., energized by his first day's successes and ready to implement the improvements he'd identified in DataFlow's antiquated systems. The overnight logs showed minor anomalies, database response times slightly elevated, a few client connections dropping during off-peak hours, nothing that appeared urgent. Tyler dismissed these variations as normal system behavior, exactly the kind of meaningless fluctuations that Marcus had probably obsessed over unnecessarily. Sarah Martinez had arrived earlier, as was her habit during stressful periods. She'd spent the previous evening reviewing system logs, documenting the small but concerning changes in DataFlow's infrastructure behavior. Her engineering background had taught her to recognize patterns, and the pattern emerging was troubling. Tyler, she approached his workstation with a printout of system metrics. We need to talk about yesterday's configuration changes. Tyler looked up from his laptop where he'd been researching cloud migration strategies. Sarah, I appreciate your concern, but the system is running fine. Look. He gestured to his primary monitor, which displayed the automated dashboard showing green status indicators across all major services. Everything's operating within normal parameters. The automated dashboard doesn't tell the whole story. Sarah spread her printouts across Tyler's desk, highlighting specific data points. Database query response times have increased by 12% since yesterday. Connection pool utilization is spiking during peak hours. These are early warning signs of system optimization in progress, Tyler interrupted, his tone carrying the patient condescension of someone explaining basic concepts to a less-informed colleague. When you modify database parameters, there's always a brief adjustment period while the system finds its new equilibrium. Sarah stared at him, recognizing the dangerous confidence of someone who'd learned database theory but never lived through a production crisis. Tyler, those parameters were specifically tuned for our transaction patterns. Marcus spent months optimizing for yesterday's problems, Tyler replied smoothly. Modern database architecture emphasizes adaptive resource management. These temporary fluctuations will resolve as the system adjusts to more efficient configurations. David Kim appeared at Tyler's other shoulder, his expression troubled. Tyler, I've been monitoring the backup processes and something's not right. The automated verification is passing, but when I manually checked a few restore points... David, we discussed this yesterday. Tyler's interruption carried an edge of impatience. Manual verification of automated processes is redundant at best, counterproductive at worst. It creates unnecessary work and introduces human error into reliable systems. But Marcus always said, Marcus isn't here anymore. Tyler's voice hardened slightly. We're implementing modern best practices, not maintaining legacy processes. That made sense 20 years ago, but served no purpose today. Sarah exchanged a look with David, both recognizing the futility of their concerns falling on deaf ears. They were witnessing the dangerous intersection of inexperience and overconfidence, but lacked the authority to override Tyler's decisions. The first client complaint arrived at 10:15 a.m. Jennifer Walsh forwarded the email to Tyler with a note about following up on technical issues. Meridian Financial Services, one of DataFlow's largest clients, reported intermittent connectivity problems during their morning transaction processing. Nothing severe, a few dropped connections, some delayed responses, but unusual enough to warrant investigation. Tyler read the complaint with growing irritation. These were exactly the kinds of minor issues that enterprise clients complained about when they didn't understand normal system behavior. He composed a response explaining that minor connectivity variations were common in complex distributed systems, and assured Meridian that DataFlow's infrastructure was operating optimally. He didn't bother investigating the underlying causes. By noon, 3 more client complaints had arrived. Pacific Insurance Group reported delayed transaction processing. Sterling Investment Partners experienced temporary database timeouts. Harbor Logistics noticed increased response latencies during their midday reporting runs. Each complaint was minor individually, but together they painted a picture that Sarah recognized with growing alarm. The system was showing signs of stress, small failures cascading through interconnected components in ways that wouldn't trigger major alarms but degraded overall performance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tyler, we need to roll back yesterday's configuration changes, Sarah said, approaching his workstation with the latest client complaints. The pattern is clear. These issues started after you modified the database parameters. Tyler glanced at the complaints dismissively. Sarah, you're correlating unrelated events. These are typical enterprise client concerns. They complain about every minor variation in system behavior. These aren't minor variations. They're symptoms of database contention during peak processing periods, exactly what Marcus's original parameters were designed to prevent. Marcus's parameters were conservative because he didn't understand modern database scaling techniques. Tyler's response revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. What you're seeing is the system adapting to more efficient resource utilization. Sarah felt her patience evaporating. Tyler, I've been working with these systems for 8 years. I know the difference between adaptation and degradation. Then you should recognize that optimization sometimes involves short-term adjustments for long-term improvements. Tyler returned his attention to his laptop, effectively dismissing her concerns. Trust me, I've seen this pattern in much larger environments. The afternoon brought more subtle indicators of system stress. Database logs showed increasing lock contention. Connection pool exhaustion occurred 3 times during peak processing windows. Client applications began implementing retry logic for failed requests, masking symptoms while underlying problems worsened. Helen Crawford's assistant called at 3:20 p.m., requesting Tyler's presence in the executive conference room. Helen sat at the head of the polished table, her expression carrying the focused intensity of someone accustomed to identifying problems quickly. She'd built DataFlow from startup to success by recognizing patterns and addressing issues before they became crises. Tyler, I've been reviewing client feedback from the past 2 days. There seems to be an uptick in technical complaints. Tyler straightened, his confident smile intact. Minor issues, Helen. Typical variations that occur in any complex system. I've been implementing some optimizations that will improve long-term performance. Optimizations. Helen's voice carried no inflection, a technique she used when evaluating claims that didn't align with observed results. Can you walk me through what you've changed? Tyler launched into an explanation of database parameter optimization, connection pool management, and resource allocation efficiency. His presentation was polished, filled with technical terminology and references to industry best practices. To someone without deep technical knowledge, it sounded authoritative and well-reasoned. Helen listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. She'd learned to distinguish between explanations that addressed problems and explanations that obscured them. Tyler, these optimizations, have they been tested in a staging environment that mirrors our production workload? The question exposed the gap in Tyler's approach. The changes are based on documented best practices for our database platform. Testing would be redundant. Nothing is redundant when it affects client systems, Helen interrupted quietly. Tyler, I need you to revert any changes you've made until we can properly evaluate their impact. Tyler's confident facade cracked slightly. Helen, with respect, rolling back improvements based on minor client complaints would be reactive. Management. These optimizations will be reverted immediately. Helen's tone carried the authority of someone who'd made difficult decisions for 20 years. I want system configuration restored to Monday's baseline by end of business today. As Tyler left the executive conference room, his confidence replaced by frustrated confusion, he passed Rick Pemberton in the hallway. His father's expression was concerned, the look of someone realizing that his decision might have consequences he hadn't anticipated. How did it go? Rick asked. Helen wants me to roll back the improvements I've made. She's letting client complaints drive technical decisions instead of trusting proper engineering practices. Rick's concern deepened. Tyler, maybe you should consider, Dad, I know what I'm doing. These are standard optimizations that any competent systems administrator would implement. The problem isn't my changes. It's that everyone here is so attached to Marcus's outdated approaches that they can't recognize proper modernization. Rick nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. He'd built his career on managing risk, and something about the current situation felt like risk that wasn't being properly managed. Back at his workstation, Tyler stared at the revert procedures he was being forced to implement. Every instinct told him that rolling back proven optimizations was wrong, that he was being undermined by colleagues who couldn't adapt to modern practices. Sarah watched from across the office as Tyler reluctantly began reversing his changes, her relief tempered by knowledge of what was coming. Tomorrow was Friday, the day of the critical system update that would test every aspect of DataFlow's infrastructure. An update that Tyler still considered routine maintenance, despite the past 2 days revealing his fundamental misunderstanding of the systems he was responsible for maintaining. As evening approached and Tyler finished the rollback procedures, the immediate symptoms began to subside. Database response times improved. Client connections stabilized. The system appeared to return to normal operation, but appearances were deceiving. The rollback had addressed symptoms without Tyler understanding their causes. He remained convinced that his optimizations were correct and that organizational resistance was preventing proper modernization. Tomorrow would bring a test that would reveal whether good intentions and theoretical knowledge could substitute for 20 years of hard-earned experience. Tyler approached that test with unshaken confidence, still believing that his training had prepared him for any challenge DataFlow's legacy systems could present. The systems themselves, complex and fragile in ways Tyler couldn't comprehend, waited silently for Friday morning's critical update, an update that would either prove Tyler's competence or expose the dangerous gap between confidence and capability. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made Silicon Valley famous. But inside DataFlow Solutions, the atmosphere carried the weight of impending crisis. Tyler Pemberton arrived at 6 a.m. for the scheduled system update, confident that his first major technical challenge would validate his competence and silence his critics. The update window was scheduled from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., a carefully planned maintenance period that Marcus had coordinated with all major clients. Tyler had reviewed the procedures the night before, dismissing most of Marcus's detailed documentation as excessive paranoia. How complicated could a routine software update be? Sarah Martinez and David Kim arrived early as well, their presence unofficial but necessary. Neither had been assigned to assist with the update, but both understood the critical nature of the work and Tyler's inexperience with DataFlow's complex systems. "Tyler, before you start," Sarah approached his workstation with a thick folder. "I've pulled together some additional documentation about system dependencies. Some of the integration points aren't obvious from the primary update procedures." Tyler glanced at the folder dismissively. "Thanks, Sarah, but I've got the official documentation from the vendor. These enterprise updates are pretty standardized. They've automated most of the complexity out of the process." David looked up from his monitoring station, concern evident in his voice. "Tyler, Marcus always said this particular update was tricky because of our custom middleware integration. Maybe we should postpone until we can't postpone," Tyler interrupted, pulling up the vendor's update documentation on his screen. "We're already past the security compliance deadline. Besides, the vendor documentation is comprehensive. They've clearly thought through all the common integration scenarios." What Tyler didn't understand was that DataFlow's systems weren't common. 20 years of organic growth had created a complex ecosystem of interdependencies that existed nowhere in vendor documentation. Marcus had mapped these relationships through painful experience, documenting not just what needed to be done, but why it needed to be done in specific sequences. At 6:15 a.m., Tyler initiated the update process. The first phase proceeded normally. The primary database cluster went into maintenance mode, client connections were gracefully terminated, and the core application servers began their shutdown sequence. Tyler watched the automated progress indicators with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as the documentation predicted. "See," he said to Sarah, who was monitoring system logs from her workstation. "Modern update processes are designed to handle these transitions smoothly." Sarah said nothing, but her expression grew increasingly concerned as she watched cascade dependencies that Tyler wasn't monitoring. The middleware layer was showing stress patterns that suggested improper shutdown sequencing, but Tyler's attention was focused on the primary progress indicators. At 6:45 a.m., the first critical error appeared. The database upgrade process halted, with a dependency conflict error. The automated update system couldn't proceed because custom middleware components were still maintaining connections that should have been terminated during the shutdown sequence. Tyler stared at the error message, his confidence beginning to crack. This wasn't covered in the vendor documentation. The automated update process had encountered a scenario that its designers hadn't anticipated. That's unusual, Tyler muttered, checking the vendor's troubleshooting guide. The documentation says this dependency check should pass automatically. Sarah appeared at his shoulder, her voice tight with controlled urgency. Tyler, you need to manually terminate the middleware connections before the database upgrade can proceed. Marcus documented the exact sequence. I don't need Marcus's documentation, Tyler snapped, stress making him defensive. This is a standard dependency issue. I just need to identify which processes are maintaining connections and terminate them manually. What Tyler didn't understand was that the middleware connections weren't simple processes that could be terminated arbitrarily. They were complex integration points that required specific shutdown procedures to maintain data integrity. Terminating them incorrectly could corrupt transaction logs and compromise the entire database. Tyler began manually killing processes, working from the vendor's generic troubleshooting guidelines rather than Marcus's system-specific procedures. Each terminated process seemed to resolve one error while creating two new ones, like a hydra of technical complexity that grew more dangerous with each attempted solution. At 7:20 a.m., Tyler made the critical mistake. In his frustration with the cascading errors, he forced the database upgrade to proceed, despite remaining dependency conflicts. The vendor documentation suggested this was possible in exceptional circumstances, though it warned about potential data integrity issues. The upgrade process resumed, but it was now operating on corrupted prerequisites. Database tables were being modified while legacy middleware components still maintained active references to their previous schemas. Transaction logs became inconsistent. Data integrity constraints began failing. Tyler, stop, Sarah said urgently, watching error. Logs explode across her monitoring screens. You need to abort the upgrade immediately. The system is fine, Tyler replied, his voice carrying the desperate confidence of someone refusing to acknowledge failure. These are just temporary errors while the components synchronize with the new database schema. But the system wasn't fine. It was failing catastrophically, in ways that Tyler couldn't recognize because he lacked the experience to interpret the warning signs. What looked like temporary synchronization errors to him were actually symptoms of cascading data corruption. At 7:45 a.m., client services began going offline. The first indication was subtle, a few client applications reporting timeout errors. Tyler dismissed these as expected during the maintenance window. But as the minutes passed, more clients lost connectivity. Then entire service clusters began failing as corrupted database queries brought down application servers. David Kim's monitoring station lit up like a Christmas tree, alarms cascading across multiple systems. Tyler, we've got critical failures across the entire infrastructure. Client data processing is down. Transaction services are offline. The backup systems are showing integrity errors. Tyler stared at the disaster unfolding across multiple screens, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't supposed to be possible. The vendor documentation had assured him that modern update processes included safeguards against catastrophic failures. Can we roll back? Tyler asked, his voice small and uncertain. Sarah was already at her workstation, frantically checking rollback procedures. The rollback systems depend on clean transaction logs, but the logs are corrupted from the forced upgrade. Tyler, I don't think we can automatically roll back from this state. The implications hit Tyler like a physical blow. He'd broken DataFlow's core systems in ways that couldn't be easily fixed. 20 years of stable operation had been destroyed in less than 2 hours by his confident dismissal of hard-earned institutional knowledge. At 8 a.m., Helen Crawford's assistant called an emergency executive meeting. At 8:15 a.m., the first major client called to report complete system outages affecting their critical business operations. At 8:30 a.m., Tyler Pemberton sat in his father's office, tears streaming down his face as he admitted that he'd lost control of DataFlow's entire infrastructure and didn't know how to fix it. The system update that was supposed to take 2 hours had become a company-threatening crisis. Client data was at risk, revenue streams were interrupted, regulatory compliance was compromised, and the person responsible for fixing it was a 22-year-old who'd just learned the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical expertise in the most painful way possible. In his quiet apartment across town, Marcus Thompson's phone had been ringing constantly since 8 a.m. He'd been watching DataFlow's public status page, which had finally changed from green to red as automated monitoring systems began detecting the scope of the disaster. He hadn't answered any of the calls yet. 20 years of institutional knowledge sat in his living room, wondering whether the organization that had betrayed him deserved to be saved from the consequences of its own poor judgment. The decision of whether to help would define not just Tyler's future, but the survival of DataFlow Solutions itself. And as Friday morning stretched into what would become the longest day in the company's history, that decision rested with the man they'd deemed expendable just 4 days earlier. Emma chose the neutral ground of a downtown coffee shop for her confrontation with David, a public space where his charm would be forced to compete with basic social decorum. She arrived 10 minutes early, positioning herself at a corner table, where she could see the entrance and exits, a precaution that felt both paranoid and necessary. David entered exactly on time, his presence immediately commanding attention from other patrons. He'd always possessed that quality, an innate magnetism that had made him the golden child, the one everyone believed would succeed, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Today, he wore his most expensive suit, his smile wide and confident, as he spotted her. "Em, you look great. Success suits you." He leaned in for a hug that Emma didn't return, settling into the chair across from her with practiced ease. "I have to say, using the legal trouble story was brilliant. Really shows you're thinking strategically about this windfall." Emma's coffee grew cold in her hands. "You knew it was a test." "Of course I knew. You think I don't know my own sister?" David's laugh carried an edge of condescension. "Look, I get it. You wanted to see who would stick around if the money disappeared. Smart move. But Emma, you have to understand. I never stopped believing in you, even when things got complicated between us." Complicated. Emma set her cup down with deliberate care. "Is that what we're calling 3 years of systematic exclusion?" David's expression shifted, the charm dimming slightly. "That wasn't my intention. Things just evolved. You made your position clear about not helping family, and people respected that boundary. By erasing me from family events? By giving you space to make your own choices." David leaned forward, his voice taking on the persuasive tone Emma remembered from 1,000 childhood arguments. "But that's in the past now. We're family, Em. We should be talking about the future." "What kind of future?" "Partnership, investment, opportunities. I've been researching sustainable energy startups, cryptocurrency ventures, real estate development." David's eyes lit up with familiar manic enthusiasm. "With your capital and my business expertise, we could build something incredible. Together." Emma studied her brother's face, searching for any trace of remorse, any acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. Instead, she saw calculation, opportunity, the same greedy gleam that had preceded every failed venture of his adult life. "What, About La Cocina Nueva? David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was different. I was undercapitalized. The market wasn't ready. You were undercapitalized because you spent the startup money on a new car and expensive restaurant. Equipment before you'd secured permits or staff. Emma's voice remained level, factual. Each terminated process seemed to resolve one error while creating two new ones, like a hydra of technical complexity that grew more dangerous with each attempted solution. At 7:20 a.m., Tyler made the critical mistake. In his frustration with the cascading errors, he forced the database upgrade to proceed, despite remaining dependency conflicts. The vendor documentation suggested this was possible in exceptional circumstances, though it warned about potential data integrity issues. The upgrade process resumed, but it was now operating on corrupted prerequisites. Database tables were being modified while legacy middleware components still maintained active references to their previous schemas. Transaction logs became inconsistent. Data integrity constraints began failing. "Tyler, stop," Sarah said urgently, watching error. Logs explode across her monitoring screens. "You need to abort the upgrade immediately. The system is fine," Tyler replied, his voice carrying the desperate confidence of someone refusing to acknowledge failure. "These are just temporary errors while the components synchronize with the new database schema." But the system wasn't fine. It was failing catastrophically, in ways that Tyler couldn't recognize because he lacked the experience to interpret the warning signs. What looked like temporary synchronization errors to him were actually symptoms of cascading data corruption. At 7:45 a.m., client services began going offline. The first indication was subtle, a few client applications reporting timeout errors. Tyler dismissed these as expected during the maintenance window. But as the minutes passed, more clients lost connectivity. Then entire service clusters began failing as corrupted database queries brought down application servers. David Kim's monitoring station lit up like a Christmas tree, alarms cascading across multiple systems. "Tyler, we've got critical failures across the entire infrastructure. Client data processing is down. Transaction services are offline. The backup systems are showing integrity errors." Tyler stared at the disaster unfolding across multiple screens, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't supposed to be possible. The vendor documentation had assured him that modern update processes included safeguards against catastrophic failures. "Can we roll back?" Tyler asked, his voice small and uncertain. Sarah was already at her workstation, frantically checking rollback procedures. The rollback systems depend on clean transaction logs, but the logs are corrupted from the forced upgrade. "Tyler, I don't think we can automatically roll back from this state." The implications hit Tyler like a physical blow. He'd broken DataFlow's core systems in ways that couldn't be easily fixed. 20 years of stable operation had been destroyed in less than 2 hours by his confident dismissal of hard-earned institutional knowledge. At 8 a.m., Helen Crawford's assistant called an emergency executive meeting. At 8:15 a.m., the first major client called to report complete system outages affecting their critical business operations. At 8:30 a.m., Tyler Pemberton sat in his father's office, tears streaming down his face as he admitted that he'd lost control of DataFlow's entire infrastructure and didn't know how to fix it. The system update that was supposed to take 2 hours had become a company-threatening crisis. Client data was at risk, revenue streams were interrupted, regulatory compliance was compromised, and the person responsible for fixing it was a 22-year-old who'd just learned the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical expertise in the most painful way possible. In his quiet apartment across town, Marcus Thompson's phone had been ringing constantly since 8 a.m. He'd been watching DataFlow's public status page, which had finally changed from green to red as automated monitoring systems began detecting the scope of the disaster. He hadn't answered any of the calls yet. 20 years of institutional knowledge sat in his living room, wondering whether the organization that had betrayed him deserved to be saved from the consequences of its own poor judgment. The decision of whether to help would define not just Tyler's future, but the survival of DataFlow Solutions itself. And as Friday morning stretched into what would become the longest day in the company's history, that decision rested with the man they'd deemed expendable just 4 days earlier. Emma chose the neutral ground of a downtown coffee shop for her confrontation with David, a public space where his charm would be forced to compete with basic social decorum. She arrived 10 minutes early, positioning herself at a corner table, where she could see the entrance and exits, a precaution that felt both paranoid and necessary. David entered exactly on time, his presence immediately commanding attention from other patrons. He'd always possessed that quality, an innate magnetism that had made him the golden child, the one everyone believed would succeed, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Today, he wore his most expensive suit, his smile wide and confident, as he spotted her. "Em, you look great. Success suits you." He leaned in for a hug that Emma didn't return, settling into the chair across from her with practiced ease. "I have to say, using the legal trouble story was brilliant. Really shows you're thinking strategically about this windfall." Emma's coffee grew cold in her hands. "You knew it was a test." "Of course I knew. You think I don't know my own sister?" David's laugh carried an edge of condescension. "Look, I get it. You wanted to see who would stick around if the money disappeared. Smart move. But Emma, you have to understand. I never stopped believing in you, even when things got complicated between us." Complicated. Emma set her cup down with deliberate care. "Is that what we're calling 3 years of systematic exclusion?" David's expression shifted, the charm dimming slightly. "That wasn't my intention. Things just evolved. You made your position clear about not helping family, and people respected that boundary. By erasing me from family events? By giving you space to make your own choices." David leaned forward, his voice taking on the persuasive tone Emma remembered from 1,000 childhood arguments. "But that's in the past now. We're family, Em. We should be talking about the future." "What kind of future?" "Partnership, investment, opportunities. I've been researching sustainable energy startups, cryptocurrency ventures, real estate development." David's eyes lit up with familiar manic enthusiasm. "With your capital and my business expertise, we could build something incredible. Together." Emma studied her brother's face, searching for any trace of remorse, any acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. Instead, she saw calculation, opportunity, the same greedy gleam that had preceded every failed venture of his adult life. "What? About La Cocina Nueva?" David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That was different. I was undercapitalized. The market wasn't ready." "You were undercapitalized because you spent the startup money on a new car and expensive restaurant. Equipment before you'd secured permits or staff." Emma's voice remained level, factual. "The health department shut you down because you cut corners on food safety to improve margins." "Emma, I read the inspection reports, David. I read the court documents from your vendor lawsuits. I know exactly why your restaurant failed, and it wasn't because I refused to give you money." The mask finally slipped. David's charming smile evaporated, replaced by something cold and calculating. "So what? You're still holding that against me? I'm your brother. Family helps family." "Where was that philosophy when I had pneumonia? Last year? When I lost my job? When I spent every holiday alone for 3 years? That's different." "How?" David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Other customers glanced over, sensing the tension. "You know what, Emma? Fine. You want to be bitter and selfish, that's your choice. But don't come crying to me when you realize money can't buy you a family." "I already have a family," Emma said quietly. "I just learned it doesn't include you." David left without another word, but not before Emma caught the flash of rage in his eyes. The same expression she'd seen that Christmas 3 years ago, when she'd first refused to enable his delusions. That evening, Emma met her mother at Linda's small apartment, a modest space that reflected years of careful budgeting and practical choices. Linda had prepared coffee and store-bought cookies, arranging them on her best plates like this was a special occasion. "I've been thinking about what you said," Linda began without preamble, "about choosing the wrong child to sacrifice for peace." Emma waited, letting her mother find her words. "When your father left, I was so scared of conflict, so terrified of losing anyone else, that I became a coward." Linda's hands shook slightly as she poured coffee. "David was loud, demanding, dramatic. You were quiet, responsible, understanding. It was easier to ask you to be patient than to ask him to be decent. For 3 years, Mom. For 28 years. Linda's voice cracked. "I've been asking you to be the adult in this family since you were old enough to understand that someone had to be. I turned you into my emotional caretaker instead of being yours." The admission hung between them, years of unspoken truth finally finding voice. "I don't know how to fix this," Linda continued. "I don't know if I can. But Emma, I want you to know that losing you has been the worst consequence of my cowardice. Not David's anger, not family drama, but knowing that I failed the daughter who needed me most." Emma felt tears threatening for the first time since this whole ordeal began. "Why now? Why are you telling me this now?" "Because almost losing you completely, thinking you might lose the lottery money and disappear from our lives forever, made me realize that I'd rather have my daughter back than my comfortable illusions about family harmony." Linda reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Emma's. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know sorry doesn't undo 3 years of holidays alone. But if you'll let me, I'd like to spend whatever time I have left proving that I remember how to be your mother." For the first time in years, Emma didn't pull away from her mother's touch. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. The start of something that might, eventually, become healing. Outside Linda's apartment building, Emma found Kevin waiting by her car, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets against the December cold. "How did it go?" he asked. "Better than expected. Different than expected." Emma unlocked her car, pausing, before getting in. "Kevin, what you said about not giving up on all of us, did you mean that?" "Every word." "Then help me figure out who's worth saving." 3 weeks into January, Emma signed the lease on a modest 2-bedroom house in southeast Portland, complete with a fenced yard for Pixel and a spare room she'd already designated as her home office. The real estate agent had pushed for something grander. "With your budget, we could look at Laurelhurst or the Pearl District." But Emma chose function over flash, sanctuary over status. Marcus helped her move, carrying boxes with the same steady reliability he'd shown for months. He'd never asked about the lottery money, never suggested how she should spend it, never treated her differently than he had when she was just the quiet neighbor in 3A. "This is perfect," he said, setting down a box of her design books in the new office. "It feels like you." Emma looked around the sun-filled room with its hardwood floors and built-in shelves, already envisioning her drawing table by the window, her inspiration boards on the walls. "How does it feel like me?" Thoughtful, unpretentious, made for creativity, not for show. The observation was so quietly accurate that Emma felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of being truly seen. Over the past month, as her family drama had unfolded, Marcus had become a steady presence, bringing soup when she was stressed, listening to her vent about David's latest demands, offering perspectives unclouded by financial motivation. "I have something to tell you," Emma said, suddenly needing to be completely honest with him. "About the money. About everything." Marcus settled onto the floor beside a stack of boxes, giving her his full attention. Emma told him about the family test, about David's true nature, about her mother's unexpected vulnerability. She explained her growing relationship with Kevin, her decision to maintain minimal contact with Jennifer, her complete severance from David and Grace. "So you've been rebuilding your family," Marcus said when she finished. "Keeping the people who deserve you, letting go of those who don't." "Is that what I'm doing?" "Isn't it?" Emma considered this. Over the past month, she'd established regular coffee dates with Linda, tentative but genuine conversations about healing their relationship. Kevin had become a true ally, challenging other family members' assumptions and serving as Emma's eyes and ears in family dynamics she was no longer part of. Even her grandmother Eleanor had surprised her with a brief but meaningful phone call. "Emma, I owe you an apology," Eleanor had said in her direct way. "I let pride and old expectations cloud my judgment about you and David. You were right to refuse him money. I was wrong to punish you for it." But perhaps the most significant development was the foundation Emma had quietly established, the Chosen Family Foundation, dedicated to helping people who'd been rejected by their biological families. She'd started small, funding therapy for young adults disowned by their parents, supporting community programs for isolated elderly people, creating scholarships for students without family financial support. "I never thought about it like that," Emma said. "But you're right. I am building a new family, just not the traditional kind." Marcus smiled, the expression warm and uncomplicated. The best families usually aren't traditional. That evening, they ordered pizza and sat on Emma's new living room floor, surrounded by boxes but feeling more settled than she had in years. Pixel had already claimed the sunny window seat, his purr audible from across the room. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said, emboldened by wine and the intimacy of shared space. "Always." "Why haven't you asked me for anything? Money, favors, opportunities? Everyone else in my life has an agenda now." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "Because I liked you before you had money. I liked talking with you in Tioni. The hallway, sharing coffee when we ran into each other at the corner store, knowing that someone kind lived next door. Money doesn't change those things. It just reveals who people really are. And who am I? The same person you were before, just with better security and the ability to help people you care about." Emma reached for his hand, a gesture that felt both natural and monumentally significant. "Marcus, I care about you too," he said simply. "Not your money, not what you can do for me. Just you." The next morning brought a call from her grandmother Eleanor, requesting a visit. Emma found her in the same kitchen where she'd learned to bake cookies as a child, the space smaller than memory but filled with the same warm light. "I've been thinking about your grandfather," Eleanor began without preamble. "About what he would say about this family mess." Emma waited, understanding that Eleanor processed thoughts aloud in her own time. "He'd be proud of you for using his numbers to win," Eleanor continued. "But he'd be ashamed of how we treated you after. He always said family was about more than blood, it was about showing up for each other." "I remember that." "I haven't been showing up for you, Emma. None of us have, except maybe Kevin and your mother eventually." Eleanor's weathered hands folded in her lap. "I want to do better. Not because you have money, but because I miss my granddaughter." They talked for 2 hours, honesty flowing more easily than it had in years. Eleanor admitted her favoritism toward David, her assumption that Emma's financial stability meant she needed less family support, her pride-driven reluctance to admit mistakes. "I can't undo the damage," Eleanor said as Emma prepared to leave. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your life again. The real part, not just the holiday photos." Driving home, Emma realized that rebuilding her family meant more than just cutting out toxic relationships. It meant nurturing the authentic connections that remained. Kevin's fierce loyalty, her mother's hard-won honesty, Eleanor's grudging but genuine respect, Marcus's steady presence. That night, she called Sarah to share the day's developments. "You're doing it," Sarah said, pride evident in her voice. "You're creating the family you always deserved." "It's messier than I expected, more complicated. The best things usually are. But Emma, listen to me. You're not the same person who spent Thanksgiving alone last year. You've learned to value yourself, to demand better treatment, to recognize authentic love. That's the real gift, not the money." As Emma settled into her new house that night, Pixel curled beside her and the sound of Marcus practicing guitar drifting through the thin walls, she realized Sarah was right. The lottery hadn't changed her life. It had simply given her the power to choose the life she wanted. And for the first time in years, she was choosing love over loyalty, authenticity over obligation, hope over hurt. The ambush came disguised as a family dinner invitation. Linda's text message was carefully crafted. "Jennifer is cooking Sunday dinner for everyone. She specifically asked me to invite you. Would you consider coming?" 2 p.m. at her house. Emma stared at the message, recognizing the manipulation even as she felt the old familiar pull of family obligation. Jennifer's house, neutral territory, or so it would seem. Her sister's children would be there, providing emotional leverage and ensuring Emma couldn't make a scene. She almost declined. Almost. But something in the phrasing bothered her. She specifically asked me to invite you. Not "we'd love to have you" or "we miss you." Jennifer had asked Linda to invite her, which meant Jennifer hadn't felt comfortable reaching out directly. Emma called Kevin first. "Did you know about this dinner?" she asked without preamble. "What dinner?" Kevin's confusion sounded genuine. "I'm not even in town this weekend. I'm visiting friends in Seattle." The pieces clicked into place. An intervention, carefully orchestrated without the one family member who might have warned her. Emma's jaw tightened with familiar anger, but underneath it was something else. A cold, hard certainty that this would be the last time her family would try to manipulate her. "Kevin, I want you to know that I love you. Whatever happens after. This weekend, that won't change. Emma, you're scaring me. What's going on? Your family is about to learn the difference between the Emma they used to know and the Emma they created." Emma arrived at Jennifer's house at exactly 2 p.m., carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of calm that comes from having nothing left to lose. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Really sorry. I've been in therapy, and I'm starting to understand how I hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm working on being better. I hope you're happy." Emma showed the message to Marcus, who read it with raised eyebrows. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think it's a year too late, but at least it sounds genuine. No requests for money, no manipulation tactics, just an apology." Marcus propped himself up on his elbow. "The question is what you want to do with it." Emma considered the message for a long moment. The Emma from a year ago would have been devastated by David's contact, would have spent hours analyzing every word for hidden meanings. This Emma felt only a distant sadness for the brother she'd once loved and the relationship that couldn't be salvaged. "I think I'll file it under noted but not actionable," she said finally. "Some apologies deserve responses. Some just deserve acknowledgement." They dressed and made their way to the kitchen, where Emma had learned to cook properly for the first time in her life. Having time to care about food, to experiment with recipes, to share meals with people she loved, these were the small luxuries that money had bought her, the ones that mattered more than any designer clothes or expensive cars. Over coffee and homemade scones, they planned their day. Emma had a client meeting for a nonprofit rebrand, Marcus had a session with a jazz trio from Seattle, and they were hosting Kevin and Eleanor for dinner to celebrate the anniversary of Emma's win. "I keep thinking about last Thanksgiving," Emma said, stirring honey into her coffee. "How alone I felt, how certain I was that my life would just continue being small and isolated." "Your life was never small," Marcus said firmly. You were building something real, even when you were alone. The money just gave you more resources to build with. Emma smiled, loving him for seeing her journey that way. Marcus had a gift for reframing her experiences in terms of strength rather than victimhood, growth rather than loss. At noon, Emma met with the directors of the Portland Family Support Network, a nonprofit that helped people who'd been rejected by their biological families. It was her favorite client, both personally meaningful and professionally challenging. The rebrand would launch next month, coinciding with Emma's announcement of a substantial endowment that would fund their work for the next decade. "We can't thank you enough," said Maria Santos, the executive director. "Do you know how many people you're going to help with this?" Emma did know, had spent months calculating the impact of her donation. But she also knew that helping others heal from family rejection was helping her heal too. Every person who found their chosen family through the organization's programs was proof that love didn't require blood relations. That evening, their small dinner party gathered in Emma's dining room, Kevin animatedly telling stories from his computer science program, Eleanor sharing memories of Emma's grandfather that somehow didn't hurt anymore, Marcus playing soft guitar, music between courses. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and comfortable silences. "I have an announcement," Eleanor said as they finished dessert. "I've decided to change my will." Emma tensed, old reflexes kicking in. But Eleanor held up a hand. "Not like that, sweetheart. I'm leaving the majority of my estate to charitable organizations. But there's a specific bequest I want to make to you. Not money, but your grandfather's tools from his workshop. He always said you had his hands for building things." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She'd loved spending time in her grandfather's workshop as a child, learning to use his carefully maintained tools to create small wooden toys and simple furniture. "Grandma, I'd be honored to have them." "Good, because I have a feeling you're going to build something beautiful with them." As their guests prepared to leave, Kevin pulled Emma aside. "I heard from Jennifer today," he said quietly. "Mom's doing well, by the way. But Jennifer wanted me to tell you that she understands why you need space, and she's not going to push for more contact than you're comfortable with." Emma nodded, appreciating both the message and Kevin's role as neutral messenger. "Thank you for telling me. She also said to tell you that she's proud of you for building the life you wanted instead of the life everyone else expected you to have." After everyone left, Emma and Marcus sat on their back porch, sharing a bottle of wine and watching pixel hunt moths in the yard. The November evening was crisp, but not cold, perfect for reflecting on the year that had changed everything. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, his arm around her shoulders. Emma considered the question seriously. A year ago, she'd been lonely, but safe, isolated, but protected from disappointment. Now she was engaged to a man who loved her unconditionally, reconciling slowly with family members who'd proven they deserved it, and using her wealth to help others find the authentic connections she'd fought so hard to build. "None," she said. Finally. "Not one." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "Here's to year 2, then." Emma smiled, thinking about her grandfather's lottery numbers, the random chance that had given her not just money, but the power to choose her own family. Sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as luck, but she'd learned that what you did with those gifts was entirely up to you. She'd chosen love over bitterness, growth over safety, authenticity over convenience. She'd learned that family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about showing up consistently with genuine care. As they headed inside, Emma caught sight of her reflection in the kitchen window, a woman who looked content, purposeful, free. The woman she'd always had, the potential to be, finally given the resources and confidence to become her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose love, new chances to build the connections that made life meaningful. But tonight, surrounded by the life she'd built on her own terms, Emma Johnson was exactly where she belonged. The lottery ticket had been worth $50 million. The lessons it taught her were priceless. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.